Good morning, students. As we are going to read the topic World Organizations, so our today's topic in the World Organization is the Security Council. So concentrate yourself. We are going to read the full-fledged topic, which is Security Council. So we are going to start now. Has 5 permanent members and 10 temporary members who have to be elected by the General Assembly after every 2 years. The 5 permanent members are number 1, United States of the America, number 2, Russian Republic, now Commonwealth of the Independent States, number 3, Great Britain, number 4, China, and number 5, France. The non-permanent members are selected from 5 members from Africa and Asia, 1 member from Eastern Europe, 2 members from Western Europe, and 2 members from the Latin America. So in total, 10 non-permanent members are elected for 2 years. Representatives of each member nations should be present at UN headquarters at all time. Next thing that we are going to read in the lecture is the powers of the Security Council. So, preserve peace security is the first part. To investigate disputes and recommend peaceful solutions. Next, apply a variety of these sanctions against aggressions. For example, trade embargoes against Iraq. This can also lead to the severance of the diplomatic relations, military matter, and economic embargoes. Next, responsible for nominating new Secretary General subject to rectification by the General Assembly. The next power is power of the vote can be enforced in the admission of the new members, enforcement of the sanctions to meet various threats and amendments in the UN Charter. Security Council is officially always in permanent sessions and cannot immediately meet to solve permanent and temporary threats. The next thing that we are going to read is the role of the Security Council. The permanent members of the Security Council, while mouthing ideological rhetoric and talking of the ending tyranny, injustice, and deprivation from the world, should have assured that they were more equal than the rest was only natural. That is how Britain could invade Falkland Islands. Both Britain and France could invade Egypt and capture Suez Canal. The Soviets could march into Afghanistan, and Israel, a portage of the US, could occupy the Arab lands without anyone being able to do anything. The founding principle that all nations are equal and enjoy equal rights is myth that soon became evident as the world hoped from one crisis to another. And as the prestige of the UN began to fall with its handling of each crisis, beginning with the Korean War and ending with the humiliation of the UN humanitarian workers in the Somalia and the recent indignities heaped on the UN peacekeepers in Bosnia, and cynics began to ask whether its decisions, many countries, including small countries like South Korea, could defy it with impunity for years. And now the recent event is the Gaza war, where a lot more people has been killed and no one is trying or having the ability to stop the Israel. How high-profile countries like India and Israel can, of course, refuse to implement UN Security Council resolutions and still remain the darlings of the only superpower of the world, that is US. On paper, the UN Secretary General remains the most powerful bureaucrat of the world, having the authority to send succor to the needy and help the weak. But in practice, nothing can move without the nod from the Big Five, more specifically from the US. The steadily growing voice in the UN General Assembly against the Soviet invasion of the Afghanistan, even though the Soviets had a veto in the Security Council, contributed a good deal to the demoralization of the political will of the Soviet leadership. The voice of the Kashmiris has not evoked that kind of the response in the Security Council because at least three of the big five, Russia, the US, and the UK, are not inclined to annoy India. With the end of the Cold War, the international community, freed of the ideological and other constraints of the East West struggle, saw new opportunities to respond more effectively to long standing problems that had defied resolution because of the superpower rivalries. As a result, energies turned to the revitalization and redefinition of the work and structure of the organization. At the same time, the thawing of the Cold War triggered long suppressed tensions and conflicts in many parts of the world. Disillusion with the UN has become one of the cliches of our time. The reality is much more complex. The Security Council has a real, if modest, achievements to its credit: a ceasefire and a democratic election in the Mozambique, a democratic transition in Namibia, the rebuilding of the civil and political society in EI Salvador, the successful freezing of the Greek-Turkish confrontation over Cyprus, and the rebuilding of the Cambodia. In Angola, the UN operation stands a chance of ending Africa's most protected civil war. In Burundi, a single UN diplomat, Ahmed Abdullah, has succeeded for 2 years in preventing genocide from spreading north from Rwanda. But as Boutros Ghali confessed, none of Boutros Ghali was the chairman of the UN, of the Security Council. Confessed none of these successes seems to count when measured against the failures in the Somalia and Bosnia, and three are other failures too: the inability of the UN to stop the night Marish civil war in Afghanistan, the collapse of the Sierra Leone and Liberia, the Indonesian repression of the East Timors, the Russian bloody attempt to crush the Chechens, and now the recent is the Gaza event. The UN Security Council is not equal to the task because it was not built for it. It is trying to reinvent itself for a world its founders had never envisaged. It is no longer policing disputes between the states, but within states. It no longer arbitrates between the sovereignties, but struggles to keep sovereignties from the disintegrating under the strain of the civil war. It was intended an organization of these states, and yet it is now called upon time after time to protect people against their states. Despite the dramatically diminished nuclear threat of the world of the 1990s, turned out to be a far more unstable place than many had hoped. The reality of the global interdependence, while promising new opportunities for global cooperation and exchange, reminds us all too often of our shared and persistent problems. More responsive forces will do little good, though if the 15 members Security Council continues to send peacekeepers on non-viable and under-resourced mission, making the Council's membership more representative of the today's world would not necessarily make it more responsible in this respect, but it would be a start. Most people agree that the five veto-clad permanent members, America, Russia, China, Britain, and France, the victors of the World War II and the world's openly declared nuclear powers, reflect the geopolitics of the 1945, not 1995. Difficult as it is to defend Britain and France both being there, both are zealously prepared to use their vetoes to protect their seats. Germany and Japan, obvious candidates whose financial contribution to the UN ranks second only to America, were expected to become permanent members this year. They did not, mainly because other parts of the world called it unfair, demanding that the geography be balanced with permanent members from Africa, Latin America, and South Asia. But which countries should represent these regions? Because there are conflicts between the countries in the regions. India, Pakistan says no. Brazil, Argentina says no. Nigeria, everybody says no. Okay, solutions galore have been suggested. Rotating members, tenured members, first, second, and third rank members, members without vote powers, dropping the veto altogether, or promising to use it in exceptional circumstances only. Germany, for the record, has indicated that it would never use the veto on its own. Italy, which objects to Germany's proposed elevation only a little less than Pakistan objects to India's, would enlarge the council by 8 to 10 seats. These would be shared on a rotating basis, 2 year in 4 years out, but 24 or 30 of the larger parts, including Japan, Germany, and Italy. It is an ingenious idea, but one that Germany rejects vigorously. Seller countries clamor for the number of the non-permanent members to be increased. The Big Five are horrified by the prospect of turning the relatively business-like Security Council into another version of the hopelessly inefficient General Assembly. The matter has been quietly shelved until a consensus can be found, which does not seem likely soon. It was central to ideas, but UN reform, says Ambassador Albright. Now it's one of the ideals about UN reforms. Reform is an deadlock for the simple reason that no one can agree on what they want the UN to be. Is it the global emergency number? The one you call when famine or flood or civil war besets you? Then forget the policy research groups and beef up peacekeeping. Is it a development agency which prevents disaster in the first place by raising income and education levels around the world? Then the Security Council needs a big rethink. Despite the tangible successes in the field of limiting the arms race, the Council still finds itself subservient to the political wishes of those who proliferate rams in the world. The Middle East and the South Asia, along with immense political and geographical upheaval, remains the kill purchaser of the arms in the world. The reason for this is the Council's inclination with either of the superpower or more recently with the USA. The nuclear race since the Holocaust or Hiroshima and Nagasaki finds room in the domain of the Council. The Security Council has to draw a line between the commitments as per the UN Charter and the maneuvering it indulges in for the developed West. It is high time that the Council be made more effective and democratic rather than fascist at present. UN Secretary General Boutros Ghali and right now the Antonio Guterres once commented that if the UN were to ever go out of the functioning, it would probably Kennedy Airport or landing according to the International Convention, which was signed by the United Nations system. Because the shots you take against yellow fever, if you are going to Africa, are done according to the international system, we will be compelled to use the international system. There is no other way, said Batrus on that time of the 50th anniversary of the organization. Let us learn from our setbacks. More importantly, let us build upon our successes. For there have been many successes in this situation to or under a metric to gain a wide attention, successes in the slow and diligent efforts to achieve progress visible only over the long time, and successes in major operations for peace, development, and democracy, which have not been given the recognition their merit. When we commemorate our organization's centenary celebrations in the year 2045, stated Maswati III, the king of the Switzerland, Agent 27, I wish to be able to stand and meet the gaze of my children and my grandchildren and say we did our best. The Security Council highlights in its milestones and setbacks, the UN marks the progress of the globe. 1945, the UN Charter is placed before the war battered world at the organization's founding conference in San Francisco. 1948, the Security Council sent a commission to try to settle the war between the India and Pakistan over Kashmir. 1949, Israel and Arab states signed ceasefire agreement waked out by the Security Council. 1949, the Netherlands grant independence to the Indonesia as a result of the UN efforts. 1950, the fluke of a Soviet walkout in the Security Council given the UN the opportunity to authorize the creation of a US-led force that fights in Korea for 3 bitter years. 1950, Rolf Bunch, UN mediator in Palestine, wins the Nobel Peace Prize. 1953, North Korea and the Security Council signs a truce. 1956, the attack by Israeli, French, and British forces on the Suez Canal is eventually resolved with the installation of the UN peacekeepers. 1960, UN peacekeepers began what turns out to be a 4-year mission to maintain order in the newly independent Congo. 1962, the Council listens to revelations about Russian missiles in Cuba. The crisis is resolved through the confrontation. 1964, the Greek-Turkish conflict in Cyprus promotes the Council to send a peacekeeping force to patrol the ceasefire line. A force remains on the island to this day. 1966, the Security Council votes economic sanctions against Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. 1967, the Council arranges ceasefire agreements ending the six-day Arab-Israel war. 1968, General Assembly approved Treaty on the Non-Cooperation Proliferation of the Nuclear Weapons and calls for its rectification. 1969, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of the Racial Discrimination comes into force. 1971, General Assembly votes to seat representatives of the People's Republic of China. 1973, the eviction of the UN observers from the Suez area is one sign that war is about to break out once again in the Middle East. 1974, General Assembly recognizes the Palestine Liberation Organization as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. 1975, the UN-sponsored Globe Convention against Chemical and Biological Weapons is enacted as soon enough honored in the breach. 1977, Security Council adopts mandatory arms embargo against the South Africa. 1978, the Security Council approves a force to try to restore peace in southern Lebanon. 1979, the Egyptian-Israel peace treaty breaks through some of the hostilities that have dogged the UN since its inception. 1982, an implorable improbable war explodes over the Falklands as the Security Council sides with Britain. 1987, the world's first global environmental treaty signed under UN auspices seeks to repair the damage mankind has done to the ozone layer. 1988, UN peacekeeping forces are awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. 1988, the UN helps arrange a withdrawal of the Soviet troops from Afghanistan. 1988, the Security Council arranges a ceasefire in the Iran-Iraq war. 1990, Namibia gains independence after holding UN-supervised elections. 1991, troops of the 1st US Cavalry Division prepare to launch the largest UN-sanctioned military operation since Korea, Operation Desert Storm. 1991, a ceasefire in the 16-year civil war in Angola is negotiated, then administered by the UN Angola Verification Mission. 1992, the UN Conference on Environment and Development, the Earth Summit, is held in Rio de Janeiro, attended by leaders from over 100 countries, the largest intergovernmental gathering in history, resulting in Agenda 21, a plan of the action for sustainable development. 1992, the Security Council helps negotiate an end of the El Salvador civil war. 1992, Secretary General Boutros Ghali issues an agenda for the peace on the preventive diplomacy, peacemaking, peacekeeping, and peace building. 1992, the Council negotiates a ceasefire agreement between the Croatian and Serbian forces in what had been Yugoslavia. 1992, the 170-nation Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro is the largest intergovernment all meetings ever, but its environmental proposals are still being argued. 1992, first ever Security Council summit with the leaders from all 15 members in attendance is held in New York, leading the Secretary General's report and agenda for the peace. 1993, Eritrean independence was declared on 27th April 1993 as a result of a referendum held with UN verification, with more than 98.5% of the registered voters voting. Eritrea was subsequently admitted to membership in the United Nations and the Organization of the African Unity. 1994, democratic elections bring Nelson Mandela to power in South Africa and end a UN arms embargo initiated by the Security Council in 1977. 1995, a worldwide peace-long program of the activities and the celebrations marks the 50th anniversary of the United Nations. The theme of the anniversary was "We the People of the United Nations, United for a Better World." 1995, China harassment of the non-government delegations overshadows achievements made the UN World Conference on Women. 1996, the General Assembly adopted the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. This is a turning point in the history of the efforts towards nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. The treaty was open for signature on 24th September. So this was the lecture, students, a very lengthy one, but very important one. So some things come from this topic, the Security Council, into the paper. So read this lecture again, understand it, learn it, and make your notes. Thank you so much.